this is the last, most interesting session of the day. We're going to talk about broadcasters and third-party platform. When we prepared this session, many people told me that it was the eternal discussion that was reserved for the public service broadcasters. But with the emergence of the tech giants in our world, our broadcasting world, and their ambitions to become the full-fledged media, this question of the relationship between the industry and the third-party platform is becoming an issue for all broadcasters, commercial, public. Today, indeed, the public media who will take the floor to share their vision and their strategies. With Laurent Frisch, CDO and Head of Production for Radio France. Laurent, please come on stage. Jonathan Kanagasooriam, Head of Content for BBC Sounds. And also, thank you, Grace Zakka, Platform Strategy Lead, who will share the EBU expertise on this very hot topic. So, Grace, the floor is yours. You're the first to take the lead on this very interesting topic for all. Thank you.
Thank you. Just a small height difference between me and Matthieu. Is this the clicker?
Yeah, this is the clicker.
So, as Matthieu said, we're here to talk about PSM, so public service media and third-party platforms. If you don't know, does anyone here know what the EBU is? I hope so. Hans? Good, you're saving me like a 3-minute introduction about who we are. Basically, for those who don't know, EBU, European Broadcasting Union, is our B2B name, what we like to say. We're also known as Eurovision, and that's where most people recognize us. But we are a company of 200 plus people that manage public service members across Europe and beyond. We have over 100 public broadcasters that belong to our network. We are very honored. It's a beautiful job because what we get to do is we get to see everything and we get to see what everyone is doing. And we try to bring in similarities and differences and challenges and opportunities and bring everyone and connect those dots together. So we're here today to talk about third-party platforms. I changed Matthieu's title and I said the new era is here because actually when it comes to digital platforms, you have to kind of contend with what you have now while working on what's going to come in the future. So you can never just do what's here today, but you have to think about what will come and how will that change and how do you need to respond to that. So this is what the platform landscape looks in my mind. And if I had better PowerPoint skills, because I built this on PowerPoint, it would move and it would breathe and it would expand and collapse and different bubbles will touch each other in different ways in a more 3D image, but my PowerPoint skills are limited. I know that this map exists in different forms in your own brains, but this is how we like to see it. It's quite big and it's quite overwhelming. And for the purpose of today, I actually wanted to zoom in only on the radio and audio space because this is Radio Days, but I very, very quickly realized that that is impossible. So I can't just zoom in to the little gray and purple and green space towards the left side. I can't do that because actually the platform landscape, even in audio, is all of it today. And that's what we have to think about. We have to think about how do these companies that have tens of thousands of employees, even after the big tech job cuts that we're seeing, have to compete with our public broadcasters that have tiny teams in comparison. And they have very, very little resources to compete with this huge, huge market. And as you can see, each kind of blob has its own issues. It has a lot of positives, but it also definitely has a lot of negatives. So how do we do that at the EBU? We've come up with this framework. Like I said, it's really important to always think about what's happening right now, but what will happen in the future, and where do these 2 points collide? So our framework might look super simple, which is great, which is what we wanted. It's actually, we look at what's happening right now, we map the landscape, and we do this by using really great member data that we have. Members are public broadcasters, that's how we refer to them at the EBU. And we try to see, okay, what are public broadcasters doing? What's the landscape doing? What are audiences doing? And then what could happen in the future? How will that change? Will they expand to more territories? Will they reach out to more partnerships? Will aggregators become content creators? Is that what's going to happen? And then we take that and we say, okay, where do these 2 points collide, and how can we focus that conversation so that we reach something tangible? Because this landscape is very fluffy, and it's very, very hard to grasp. And I know that when public broadcasters or even commercial broadcasters have conversations with big tech, it's not always tangible. It's very fluffy, there's a lot of yes, we care, yes, we want, yes, we will, but does anything really materialize? And this is why we want to try to focus that conversation and say, okay, what are the most essential needs for public service media to thrive in the future? And those are the needs we need to try to figure out how to get. And that's where we come in as the EBU. We say, okay, what can the EBU do, us 200 plus people, versus what can our members do together, versus what other players can do at the same time. So this is kind of how we contend with just the sheer size of the space. And we can do that with any platform or any group of platforms. So you can do that on audio distribution as much as you can do that exercise on Spotify and try to see where they're going to go. And then how do we need to respond to that? Or do we need to respond? Can we preempt certain things and be ready before they are? That's the wish. And then finally, we take these kind of really big, untangible bubbles and we try to put public service media at the middle. And I think that's a lot with what's been happening these days in the public service media space. We see a lot more selfishness, which is great. That's what we want. We want to start thinking about less hyper-distribution, which means everywhere, all the time, with everything, and a little bit more conscious distribution. What should we put on, and what should we give big tech, and what's the return? Is it reach? Is it conversion? Where do we go from here? And what's really important is the direction of those arrows. The first two, the top two, is where PSM needs to go and actively reach out to their audiences. So distribution and apps, it's actually building apps for each of those different touch points. And then the same goes for content. So it's not just the app, it's the piece of content itself. So this could be a podcast that you're distributing to Spotify. And then the lower is where you're trying to push your audiences back to you. And actually it's all really a push and pull. It's all between pushing them from one platform back to yours, from your platform back to another one, given your platform can actually support what you're trying to do. So that's another part of, I think, the conversation we'll be having. But all of it comes down to basically bringing public service media to your audiences and having the audience know that this is public service media content, especially young audiences, because they're going to have to think about, are these brands relevant to me in the future? Why should I pay my license fee? I've never listened to BBC Radio 1. No offense, Jonny. But I have. But probably a 14-year-old, not sure. So that you have to constantly think of this as a living organism, like a breathe. You breathe in, you breathe out. It contracts, it expands. And that's what you need to try to focus on when you're public service media is how do you maintain your integrity? How do you bring people to your own platform so that you really touch the value where it is? But at the same time, how do you make sure you're out there and reaching everyone? Because ultimately, that's your remit. You're here to be everywhere for everyone without compromising on your own. So these are my introductory slides.
Thank you. Save your question for the end of the session, but I know that you will have plenty of questions. Jonny, I do not pay my fee, but I'm listening to Radio 1. I have a good excuse because I'm French, but...
Yeah. Yeah.
But we do not have to pay the fee to listen to your speech today.
Okay. Just buy me a drink later. Yeah. Okay. I'm Jonny Kay. I'm the head of content for BBC Sounds, and I was asked to sort of come here today and give you an overview over what the BBC's been doing over the last couple of years in this space. And I'm going to give you a couple of... I'm going to give you a brief history lesson of BBC Sounds. I'm also going to sort of talk about some of the sort of content offer that sits within it and the catalogue and how it performs. And then sort of finally I'm going to leave you with a few headlines which hopefully will lead us to an interesting conversation about kind of what the nature of public service media is when it starts to build its owned and operated platforms in a fairly established sort of tech landscape in the audio space, certainly in the UK. So, BBC Sounds is the owned and operated audio platform of the BBC. It takes everything that we have across the entire organisation And I describe it as being quite a small shop front for a very big warehouse. So it has a huge amount of content within it. I'll come and talk to that in a minute. But our vision is to become the UK's most loved and valued and trusted audio product. And so our mission is to reinvent BBC Audio, which in the case of radio has been around for 100 years, connecting people to radio, music and podcasts they love anytime, anywhere. Relatively straightforward, but the path to it has not been. We've been on a journey over the last 4 years, testing, learning, but also trying to move fast in an organisation that has a lot of process, a lot of stakeholder hoops to jump through, all the while staying in quite close dialogue and maintaining our relationships with third parties as we evolve what audio from the BBC means. It's been a balance of both driving owned and operated growth and making sure that Sounds is everywhere, that listeners engage with BBC content. I'll go on to talk a little bit more about the multi-platform offer, but this timeline shows you all the way from when we had a BBC Alexa skill prior to Sounds being launched through to the app beta release in 2018. I know there are a couple of colleagues here. That was sort of an interesting moment of us sort of putting this out into market, into a very mature market. But then also in 2019, backing ourselves and switching off iPlayer radio and migrating those audiences over. Then, bit by bit, we built out what Sounds is across a number of different devices, from smart TV and speakers through to rolling it out internationally. And actually, that's led us now onto thinking about content in Sounds and how innovative we can be in terms of driving on-demand consumption. Because the very reason for Sounds being created was, of course, to create the digital on-demand future for the BBC in the audio space. Whether that's through discovery mechanics like back-to-back sounds, which is essentially playlisting technology of episodes, through to being available on Sonos. And then sort of finally, last year, we did mandatory sign-in on Alexa, which allows us finally to have the data and the performance figures of everyone who is listening to live radio listening to live radio on Alexa. And then sort of the most important thing in relation to this particular debate and sort of conversation is that very recently, actually last Thursday, if this hadn't happened last Thursday, I'd have a lot less to talk about, so I'm quite lucky. Ofcom, who are the government organisation who monitor the BBC, as we change things like our distribution policies, create new content formats, have made a ruling and granted us permission for a range of tactics that we've been experimenting over for the last 18 months. So I'll be going on to talk about that in a little bit more detail shortly. As I said, we want to have the best possible experience across a number of different platforms and sort of user interfaces that listeners come to. Primarily, we are focused on being a mobile app experience, but actually the desktop experience is really sophisticated and was our sort of first thing to market. And also, the smart speaker experience is becoming increasingly vital for our growth. We obviously have a heritage in radio, and we want to be the very best place to listen to BBC Radio in the market. And that's because we have these 10 very powerful network stations, Radio 1, actually. We have launched 2 brand extensions in Radio 1 Dance and Radio 1 Relax, 7 nation stations, 40 local stations, which now have their content surfaced in the local for me rail, but also World Service Radio and CBeebies Radio. So we are very much still a radio app for people who love linear. But also, we've been building out a huge on-demand content catalogue, both of podcasts, and those podcasts build on our heritage of publishing on-demand radio to RSS for many, many, many years, on-demand music formats that bring the magic of that of a Radio 1 or a 2 or a 6 music in a format which is better for sort of habitual consumption in the on-demand space. But also, as I mentioned, back-to-back sounds, which are these sort of new discovery mechanics. And I have a colleague here, Emma. I'm just going to do a shout-out for another BBC colleague who is doing a session tomorrow at 1:45, specifically on all of the content innovation and format innovation that we've been doing in the space that I haven't really done justice to in this slide. So if you'd like to hear her as head of metadata and publishing and also our head of new formats and innovation, they'll be doing a deep dive into all the content that BBC Sounds have been doing over the course of the last 18 months. So that leads to a lot of content, a very, 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 very rich and very, very deep content catalogue of over 200,000 plus pieces of content at any one time, covering live radio, on-demand radio, podcasts, music mixes, back-to-back sounds, and audiobooks, which we believe is a very rich destination and the best possible destination of BBC content in the world. And it is converting to growth. So in 2022, we published at Christmas that we've seen a record number of plays on our app, jumping up 12% year on year to 1.48 billion. We also had a record growth in podcast listening of 20% up year on year. And this is a testament to the team and how we work collaboratively across the whole of the BBC to deliver a really brilliant audio experience in BBC Sounds. And most recently, ahead of an April moment where we'll be sort of talking about our sort of year-to-date our financial year end sort of figures, we are now at 4.6 million signed in weekly reach, which is way above our targets. And so we are extremely happy with that. Just a shout out to the 4.75 million top week, which we were all very proud of, which only happened in February. So that's the sort of history lesson and the sort of overview of BBC Sounds. And I know it's been quite macro, but this is probably the most important slide that I want to talk about today, which is that our job is to provide value for all as a public service broadcaster. So even though our position in the market is evolving through having BBC Sounds launched and sitting alongside our tech partners, and they are our partners, we collaborate with them frequently, our public service mission is exactly the same, which is to provide value for all. What does that mean? Well, it means something quite nuanced. It means on platform, BBC Sounds is the very best product for people to listen to their favourite BBC content. We believe that. And we have seen that it effectively drives understanding and appreciation of the licence fee. So we want it to grow. Whilst we're doing that, we obviously value off-platform. We're the UK's biggest content producer, and we talk to everyone all the time, and they're talking to us. We value off-platform reach, especially for underserved audiences, and so we'll continue to dynamically and creatively partner with third-party platforms. And sometimes they pick up the phone to us, and we love that. I think in the audio market, it's worth saying that we are incredibly sanguine and sort of humble about how difficult this is. We've launched into a very mature market with set habits. We're not trying or expecting to be the only audio destination for UK listeners who have more choice than ever, multi-service bundles. We will always be part of a mixed ecology of consumption. So what does that mean for the future? So on Thursday, as I mentioned, Ofcom published a report about our recent trial to find new ways of growing sounds and providing more value to audiences, including making some programmes available first on BBC Sounds and acquiring titles from third parties ad-free. The trial produced positive results, and Ofcom have confirmed that they are satisfied with distributing our titles in this way, and making the content available from third parties will not have a material impact on the market. So, moving forward, we will continue to review the distribution of individual titles on a case-by-case basis to help grow BBC Sounds, commission even more ambitious on-demand content to tap into the growing podcast and on-demand habits around music, and we will grow our content catalogue with more ad-free third-party content. And that's my final slide, but I wanted to leave you with sort of two big thoughts. One is that we've built a product that we're proud of and the license fee payers love, and they should see it thrive. And we've worked very, very hard at that. You know, we're not a tech company, but we have had to build a culture that feels agile around test and learn, and we have had to break new ground. It sort of felt like building a sort of smart tech-enabled house on sort of like classical foundations. And it has been hard at times, but we've pushed through those barriers, and we have something which is truly distinctive and unique in the market. And we're not trying to be parity with the market. We're trying to own a very, very specific space. And I think that translates into value from our sort of public funding. And the second thing is that we're in dialogue with everyone, and we want to stay in dialogue with everybody. It's obviously changed our position in the market. We sort of admit that. But we need the tech platforms and off-platform reach, and we want to work in sort of creative partnership with as many people as possible. So I guess we're just sort of saying we continue to be open for business and conversation in all of this, whilst also growing owned and operated. And that is a nuanced position, but hopefully it's a position that I've been able to articulate. Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you, Jonny. Laurent, as Jonny, do you want to deliver the most loved and value audio product in France?
Obviously we will. So, as for me, I will say a bit the same thing as you, Jonny, but a different way. And I wanted to start with a graph that I haven't seen this morning in any presentation, a message that I haven't heard in any presentation. That is, the radio is not going well. It's been 20 years now that, at least in France, radio is losing listeners, as you see on this slide, for everyone, the whole population, and also for the youngest, where maybe it's on its way of disappearing. Maybe not, but it's not good at all. The second thing I wanted to show you to start my presentation was the number regarding Radio France, the number of listenings of our podcast on aggregators, on mostly Apple Podcast. Actually, it's maybe 75% of our listenings on third parties. So we see that it first grew a lot till 2017. Podcast listenings was emerging. It was easy for us to get prominence on Apple and also on others, and mostly because Apple didn't have any business strategy with podcasts at that time. Obviously, we got only poor data, as you all know, and that thing hasn't changed, unfortunately. But things went different starting 2018, as you see on this graph. The usage was still growing, but not as fast. And regarding Radio France, we only got 10% prominence of what we got before, meaning it's harder and harder for us to make people discover our new shows and our new podcasts. Now Apple, Spotify, Amazon, Google at the time had and have business strategies. They still give us poor data, and we still don't know much about what's going on aggregators and on third platforms. And we're not sure of what the figures mean, actually. We're not sure that all these figures are real listenings. Actually, we know for sure that maybe only 60, 70, or 80% of them are real listenings, but we're not sure. And this is really a problem for us. So about tech giants and their platforms, the first thing I wanted to say, and you know that, is that they are successful, and they are successful because they are useful. They are useful to the people, obviously. This is why they are on Google Search, on TikTok, on Instagram, on Apple, on Spotify, etc. But they're also useful for us. As people are listening less and less radio, well, we can use their platforms to grow our reach and to conquest new listeners. Well, that was the first thing. That was the only good thing about them. Because the second one is that, well, let me be clear on what I say when I say there are media. For me, you are a media when you choose and when you're chosen. When you choose what's important, so you decide what you can show to your listeners, but also you're chosen, meaning the people are choosing to listen to you. And in this perspective, for me, TikTok, Instagram, and the others are real media. When my daughter is going on TikTok, or she's not going on TikTok, she's going on Instagram. When she's going on Instagram, she's not deciding to listen to France Inter or to the BBC or to this pure player. She's choosing Instagram. So for her, Instagram is a real media, and she's spending some time on it, as most of the people do. The third thing is that they are content producers. Not all of them, but we know that Spotify, Amazon more and more, and some others are producing their own audio content. But with AI, they're going to be able to create original-looking contents more and more, all of them. And we saw this morning with Radio GPT an impressive show of what will be possible, what is possible today, and what will be possible tomorrow. Now they're rich also with data, and we're not. They know a lot about the people, about our listeners, and they don't give us much of all this knowledge, and this is a problem for us. So, for me, tech giants, platforms, are not really good people, even though they're useful. They're a huge danger, and you recognize all of them, the Joker walking around in Prague. Yep, why not? Now our strategy regarding this issue. I can call that the 3 circles strategy. I invented that only for this talk, but it works pretty well. The first circle, the outside circle, is about creating awareness towards maximum number of people through all the social networks. And the second circle is create discovery. It's really different. Create awareness means I want people know that we exist and create discovery. It's not about us existing, it's about choosing us. So we need to have some people discover that we're still doing a lot of good things, and we will still be doing a lot of good things. And that happens mostly for us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, and some other. And the third circle is us, our platform, where we deliver the best experience for our listeners. But most of the people that are listening us on our platform, they already know that we exist, and they already know that we're producing good content for them. So we need to raise different strategies and different content strategy on all of these for all of these circles. For Instagram, Snapchat, TikTok, Facebook, etc., we need to invent new formats, try and try again, because we obviously make mistakes. We need to gain attribution, which is really important, and you say that, Grace. But we also need to put limited effort, because that's not our primary job, making videos for short videos for these platforms that are just watched to during a couple of seconds. We need to hire creative people also to do that. We have a lot of creative people for radio, maybe for podcast, not really for video. The second circle, we need to address it by distributing our podcast and our streams, but with conditions. The first one, for us, the hardest maybe, was to have all these guys recognize that we have right holders, and they need to be responsible for distribution towards right holders. It was okay with Amazon, with Spotify, with Deezer, with some of them. It's hard with Apple, and it's not easy with all of them. We also introduced a chronology of distribution for podcasts. I talked about that 2 years ago, where we might change a little bit the way we see that, but just remember we have all of our shows on our platform, that is 2.2 million sounds right now, and we only deliver like 1 month on these platforms, meaning maybe 10,000, 15,000 sounds at this precise moment. Prominence, data, etc. We've talked about that already. Now on our app, the best experience for the listeners, we are investing a lot on loyalty, meaning developing the user accounts, but also the links between live radio and podcast, so that they are not two different universes as they used to be, but they are part of the single experience of audio and of listenings. So we have two main challenges and succeeded in that. First, being brilliant, and that's not easy, being brilliant in everything we are making, because we're not rich, and everything we're making must have a purpose, and we need to execute it with outstanding results. The second one is getting corporate alignment, which is not easy either, because we don't have that digital culture a lot in our companies, and we need to make a lot of effort so that every radio producer, every radio boss, every guy that is doing a technical thing must be also aware of what we're doing, why we're doing all that, and how will we survive in that new world. So just to be a graph that I'm proud of, this is the number of Radio France podcast listenings on our own platform. You see it's growing, and we hope it still will grow. What I didn't say about the three circles is that, well, when we get awareness to the people, we hope that one day they will try to listen to us, because our ultimate goal is not being a social media, but to be, for a long time, a radio media. These are the key takeaways. I won't comment them, but you will have them on the presentation. You can picture that if you want to. It's not that interesting, but if you want to, be my guest. And if you have question, the only thing I forgot to say is that the 4 or 5 pictures you've seen in my presentation were made with Midjourney, so they're only AI, including the Joker in Prague. Thank you.
I'm trying to find the Joker in the room. Is there any Joker from the tech platforms, big tech? No? My dear friend Holly is having the mic for your first question, Francis.
Yeah, and thank you for your presentation, the three of you. Francis Goffin, Belgium Broadcasters Association. A question for you, Jonny. Interesting BBC Sounds, everybody knows it's very, very good, very efficient. I saw your slides. You didn't mention the cars for BBC Sounds. So how do you manage to for BBC contents to be into the dashboard?
I was specifically told not to talk to in-car in my presentation and a number of other things because there are people in distribution at the BBC who are more authoritative on that distribution strategy. So I specifically didn't put it in.
Just to let you know that the EBU have a very productive and interesting working group about connected car. So if you want to join the group, please wave us. You have to be a public broadcaster, member of the EBU, but you will learn so many interesting things. So, there's any more question from the room? Yeah, Holly.
Hi, my name is Laurent. So, as I understood it, in Radio France, you will draw content from the third-party platforms. And to what degree do you do that at BBC? I mean, could you give that a few words?
Sorry, could you just clarify?
To what degree do you withdraw content from third-party platforms?
So we have just finished a trial where we were specifically taking radio shows that had been published to RSS into a 28-day window. And that's the part that needed a trial because that was a new way of working. We've had permission since the launch of Sounds to make new podcast commissions, first or only on Sounds, so either in a window or exclusive to Sounds since the point of launch. Now that we've been granted these Ofcom permissions, we will begin to look at the overall content catalogue and on a case-by-case basis work out whether there are other radio programs published to third-party platforms that we would want to window to grow our platform. But it's a case-by-case basis, and we'll adjudicate it on strategic merit.
Maybe you don't want to precise
Yeah,
something?
because we don't withdraw content from platforms. We put contents, we distribute content on these platforms. The fact that before, during years, we didn't operate a distribution, an organized distribution, doesn't say that now we're withdrawing. Now we are actively distributing, so we are working with these platforms, we're working on prominence, on choosing, on data, on many things. So we're not withdrawing, we're distributing.
95% of BBC content is published to RSS. So the content catalogue that we're talking about within the trial is 5%. As the biggest producer of content in the UK market, just to give it some scale, I just want to sort of quantify it.
Is there any other question in the room? Yes, just behind you, Ollie. Just behind. Yeah, thank you.
Hey, Olivier Audou from Vocast. One question again for BBC. A few weeks ago, the live streaming of the BBC radios have been withdrawn from Radio Player. Mm-hmm. And so is it to favor BBC Sound? What is the strategy behind it?
I knew I was going to get this question. And again, I was sort of told to... I was told to avoid it, not because I don't want to talk about it, and it's not a brilliant topic to talk about, but there are people who I think would be more qualified, perhaps, to have a longer-term conversation with you about it. Yeah?
Another question? Yeah, no? I've got a question for you, Grace. From what you've learned today with these two different strategies, do you consider that these moves are becoming the new trend in Europe, or this is the only two examples that we have with such strategies?
No, I think it's not a black and white answer. So I can't easily tell you, yes, absolutely, public service media are prioritizing their own platforms versus third-party platforms. What I can tell you is the idea of putting everything everywhere for the longest amount of time, full episodes, the entire season of a podcast, those days are slowly going to come to an end because their own platforms are going to get stronger. And that investment, like Jonny and Laurent were saying, that's a big financial investment for a public service broadcaster. It's a huge chunk of your budget. So you have to, walk the walk. You have to get your audiences to your platform so that they see where that money went at the end of the day. But as long as your platform is strong enough, it's good enough, it can stand on its own 2 feet, then you can start pushing your audiences back in. But if your platform is not there yet, which is totally normal, not everyone is the BBC or Radio France, then yeah, you do rely much more on third-party platforms to reach your audiences. But slowly that mentality is going to start, well, I can be a bit more selfish now. I have a bit more leverage. We can work together as public broadcasters, and maybe I wouldn't want to use the negotiate word, but kind of approach these platforms together, because we are ultimately much, much, much stronger when all of them come together. So yes, we will get there eventually, but we're not there today.
Thank you, Jonny.
Only because I got 2 questions about it. I thought that I'd have to have one, and I don't want to look like I'm being sort of uncooperative. We're not pulling away from Radio Player. The opposite is true. We're continuing to invest in Radio Player as they refocus their energy by engaging with the automotive industry to try and secure radio place in cars. The BBC remains committed to Radio Player as an entity, and it is important to the industry to continue to collaborate in a joint venture. We know that Jan has sort of recently joined Radio Player France, and we look forward to working with him and developing Radio Player's future growth plan. Only because there were 2 questions, but it wasn't in my presentation, so I felt I owed you an answer.
Any last question? Yes, at the end. We've got time only for one, sorry.
Okay, sorry.
And while Oli is trying to find the right people, I just want to remind you, if you are going to the event tonight, do not forget your badge. No badge, no entrance.
No badge.
I will be the bumper, so trust me, you will never get in.
Matthieu? Yeah.
Yeah.
Vincent Benveniste from David. A question to Jonny, related to the Tim Davie speech.
I have an answer for this one.
Okay. What's the credit card number of Tim Davie?
Sorry, please ask your question.
Yeah, in his speech, he sort of informed us about the possible end of broadcasting from the BBC and moving to an all-in on the digital side. The question to you particularly is that going to make your life easier or more complex?
Oh, it's a good question. Yeah, much easier. Because the headlines have been distorted a little bit, right? Broadcast channels will be essential for many years to come, but the market's clear. Laurent's outlined the market, right? Like, we have challenge, we have threat, we have danger. So broadcast channels will be essential for years to come, but the world is moving to online. Over time, we need to be active about planning for it. We have to be front foot. BBC Sounds is the BBC putting its future first. And we can't have endless meetings convincing everybody that that is the case. So to have a leader in Tim Davie who is able to articulate that and give energy to the digital experts that they can remake the BBC so that it stays around for 100 years makes our lives significantly easier. And it allows us to pull more people with us in the organization to the point around collaboration and creating behavior change. So I think it's done us a great service, and it's a testament to the work that we've done. I would say that the overall headline is perhaps a little bit distorted. The strategy is much more about accelerating digital growth and about growth of online, as opposed to a binary world where one ends and the other begins, if that makes sense, because we're in a period of transition. Is that okay?
Thank you very much. Please give them a great round of applause. See you tomorrow after the party tonight. Take care, and the badge.